In the aftermath of World War II, Japan faced not only physical devastation, but a deeper crisis of meaning. With defeat and occupation came a loss of ideological certainty, raising urgent questions. What remains of human values after collapse, and whether humanity itself can be rebuilt? Produced within this post-war context, Kon Ichikawa's Fires on the Plain, produced in 1959, and Akira Kurosawa's Rashomon, produced in 1950, offer two radically different cinematic responses to these questions. Fires on the Plain follows Private Tamura, a second starving soldier wandering through the Philippine jungle, where survival reduces human life to the level of the body. Rashomon, set in 11th century Japan, reconstructs a samurai's murder through four conflicting testimonies, exposing how truth shifts with perspectives. This video essay examines how each film utilizes the combination of cinematography and mise-en-scène, narrative structure, and symbolic action to explore what remains of human nature after war. Ichikawa presents collapse as physical and irreversible, reducing individuals to bodies governed by survival. Kurosawa locates the crisis in perception itself, exposing the instability of truth, yet leaving open the possibility of ethical reconstruction. Together, both films suggest that in post-war Japan, human nature is not simply destroyed but reconstituted under new conditions. First, in Fires on the Plain, Ichikawa uses cinematography and mise-en-scène to show how war strips human beings of individuality and pushes them into increasingly degraded situations. Notably in the film, soldiers are constantly moving across ruined landscapes as exhausted bodies, defined not by who they are but by what they still possess: boots, food, weapons, or simply the ability to keep walking. This becomes especially clear in the boot exchange sequence. Ichikawa employs static wide shots and repeated close-ups, depicts how three soldiers encounter a pair of discarded boots. The first soldier takes them and leaves his worn pair behind. The second repeats the action. By the time Tamura arrives, the boots are worn down to near uselessness, and he walks away barefoot. The use of a fixed camera here further frames audience's attention solely on the broken shoes rather than the soldier. The repetition of soldiers' action and sole attention on the object rather than the man gradually strips away individuality because the soldiers here are just bodies passing through the same desperate gesture. At the same time, each repetition leaves the next person in a worse position, where the boots left in the place are more damaged. The sequence, therefore, shows that survival under the war context is deteriorating. And by the time Samura walks away barefoot, the scene suggests that war wears people down step by step, until even the most basic signs of dignity disappear. In this sense, Ichikawa suggests that under the condition of war, human nature itself is reorganized around endurance, loss, and the gradual erosion of what it means to remain human. In comparison, in Akira Kurosawa's Rashomon, the director turns cinematography into a tool for unsettling the viewer's sense of truth. Whereas Fires on the Plain dissolves soldiers into a closed economy of survival, Rashomon uses shifting perspectives and elusive light to fragment reality itself. Kurosawa visualizes this uncertainty through the way he films the woodcutter's journey into the forest. In the tracking sequence preceding the crime, the camera follows the woodcutters by constantly shifting the camera angle a distance. The camera tilts up and down, swings above him like a bird-eye view, and glides behind. The camera also breaks the 180-degree rule by shifting the camera from following the woodcutter's movement from left to right and from right to left. Over 12 shots, the woodcutter is shown from nearly every angle, and this rapid change draws viewers' attention not to the fact that a man is walking, but to the act of watching itself. And viewers, therefore, are being taught, before any testimonies begins, that perspectives is already unstable. However, Kurosawa goes further than simply destabilizing perspectives, but also telling the audience that the truth is filtered and reconstructed by the several shots of the sunlight. The sunlight in the film are always partly blocked by branches and leaves. This indicated each character's story, even though seem to illuminate and reveal the truth, but in reality are reconstructed and filtered by their own favor. In other words, truth is distorted by the very attempts to reveal it. This, therefore, further tells the viewer that the truth we receive is never actual content of the event, but a projection of each character's desire to appear innocent, honorable, or morally justified. Second, in Fires on the Plain, Ichikawa combines the linear narrative with Tamura's monologue to show a gradual collapse of both body and mind. The entire film follows Private Tamura's movement chronologically. In the earlier scene, around 30 minutes, Tamura's monologue is still coherent. He explained that he was expelled from both his units and his hospital, and he says that he was told to die and intends to do so. The line is definitely disturbing, but his thinking still has order. He understands his situation and can still narrate it to himself. Visually, the film reinforced this continuity through long takes of Tamura walking through the battlefield. The camera watches him move past corpses and discarded equipment, while fades and dissolves blur the landscape around him. In a streamlined shot, his body appeared tiny against the hills and the open ground, suggesting both physical weakness and human insignificance in the vast machinery of war. Together, viewers can see that Tamura's hardship of moving across the jungle, but at the same time understand Tamura's mind is still rational and holds. By the later scene around 1 hour and 20 minutes, that hold has broken. His monologue fragments into disconnected lines. I didn't do it. I'm dreaming again. Someone is watching me. The loss of clarity of his narration indicates his mental state of corruption. The film's steady pacing enhances this collapse. With no change of the style of music, the editing, the films continue to showcase Tamura in the same measured pace. This disjunction between a hurried linear storytelling and this integrating linear voice indicates director choices of not treating Tamura's breakdown as an exceptional moment. This suggests the broader idea that the war does not stop to recognize individual suffering and exposes how in post-war Japan, survival itself can become a downward spiral. In contrast to a linear narrative of Fires in the Plain, Rashomon builds its narrative through repetition and contradiction. The film returns to the same violent event, the death of samurai 4 times, through 4 different witnesses. Each version reshapes the event into a different moral story, one that protects the speaker's dignity, excuses their shame, or preserves their self-image. Repetition does not bring the viewer closer to the truth. It reveals how truth is constantly rewritten by the person telling it. The clearest example is the samurai's death. In Tajumaru's version, the death becomes heroic. He presents himself as a powerful bandit who wins the wife and kills the samurai in a dramatic duel. In the wife's version, the scene becomes a story of shame and emotional collapse as she claims to have stabbed her husband because of the look of the husband's eyes. The samurai, speaking through a medium, claims he died by his own hand to preserve his honor. Each version is shaped entirely by what the speaker needs to believe about themselves. Even the woodcutter, the only witness without an obvious stake in the outcome, is later revealed to be withholding something. In Rashomon here, no one stands outside desire. Kurosawa's editing reinforced this. Tajimori's testimony is cut quickly, driven by point-of-view shots that gives him energy and control, which means that he's the hero of his own story. The samurai's count is slower and more static, making him appear passive even with his own death. These shifts suggest that each version is hugely constructed by the speaker's personality and the exposure of personal flavor. This is where Rashomon diverges sharply from Fires in the Plain. Ichikawa's linear structure makes collapse feel inevitable, whereas Kurosawa's fractured structure makes truth feel unrecoverable because every attempt to reveal it is already an act of self-defense. Finally, Fires in the Plain uses the recurrent symbol of the fire and the cannibalism to question whether humanity can survive when war turns hope into illusion and survival into moral collapse. Throughout the film, Tamura fixates on distant columns of smoke, which he imagines are farmers burning corn husks. As long as he can see that smoke, he believes normal life continues somewhere beyond the jungle, and that belief sustains him through a landscape of corpses and starvation. Yet, when he finally walks towards one of those fires, he is shot. The smoke was never a sign of home, and this vision of normality that kept him alive proves fatal. This oscillation between lifeline and trap reflects a broader tension in post-war Japan, where rapid reconstruction and the promise of prosperity concealed unprocessed trauma and moral dislocation beneath the surface. If the fire gestured towards imagined normacy, cannibalism exposes what that world looks like once all moral limits collapse. In one of the film's most disturbing moments, a dying soldier offers Tamura pieces of his own flesh. Elsewhere, survival is reduced to a brutal logic. One must either consume or be consumed, becoming what soldiers called the monkey meat. This phrase does more than describe hunger. It strips human beings of identity and reduces them to raw matter within the system of exchange. Cannibalism here, therefore, becomes a symbol of moral erosion taken to extreme, where survival no longer depends on ethics, but on one's ability to treat others as expendable. In this sense, the film suggests that war restructures human relations into a predatory order close to Hobbes' idea of a war of all against all. Following this light, Ichikawa's ending remains unresolved. Tamura's movement towards the fire can be read as fatal misrecognition, but also as a final attempt at redemption. Having resisted the cannibalistic logic around him, he walks towards what he believes is a world of order and normacy. Even if mistaken, the act carries moral weight. He refuses to survive by abandoning humanity. The film therefore leaves redemption uncertain. If hope depends on illusion, can it still redeem? Or does the need for illusion only reveal how far humanity has already collapsed? In comparison, in Rashomon, Akira Kurosawa turns two objects, the ruined gate and an abandoned baby, into symbols that show how moral certainty collapsed after war but can also be rebuilt. The film both opens and closes beneath the Rashomon gate, a decaying structure battered by relentless rain. Kurosawa frames it as more than a setting. Its darkness, emptiness, and constant downpour create a space where social order has already broken down. Historically associated with crime and abandonment, the gate becomes a site where human suffering accumulates without resolution. The rain obscures visibility, echoing the film's fractured testimonies. Nothing can be seen clearly, and no version of truth can fully emerge. In this way, the game materializes a world in which moral certainty has dissolved and human experience has become anonymous and unstable. The baby found under the gate, however, introduces a counter symbol. Near the end, the woodcutter, priest, and a commoner discover an abandoned infant. The woodcutter decided to adopt the child, and traditional music underscored the moment. Film scholar Donald Ritchie notes that this final scene marks the crucial differences between Kurosawa's adaptation and Runo Akutagawa's source story, whereas Akutagawa is content to question all moral values, all truth, and Kurosawa insists upon hope, upon the possibility of gratuitous action. The baby thus represents a fragile new start. It implies that, even in a society riddled with lies and self-interest, compassion can restore human connection. By juxtaposing the decaying gates with the rescued child, Kurosawa contrasts moral collapse with the potential for renewal. They stand in sharp beliefs against Fires in the Plain, where Ichikawa uses smoke and cannibalism to show how war strips people down to desperation and false hope. Kurosawa offers a symbol of community emerging from chaos, leaves one door open. The game reminds us that post-war Japan was marked by ruin and distrust, but the baby points to the idea that rebuilding trust begins with individual compassion. In the broader context of occupation and competing histories, this symbolic ending suggests that a fractured society can still find a path towards moral restoration. Together, Fires in the Plain and Rashomon offer two responses to the crisis of human nature in post-war Japan. Ichikawa traces a linear descent in which the body and mind collapse under the logic of survival, reducing humanity to something material and expendable. Kurosawa, by contrast, fractures perception itself, showing how truth is reshaped by desire and self-preservation, yet still leaves space for ethical action. What emerges is not simply loss of humanity, but transformation under extreme conditions. Whether through Tamura's ambiguous search for redemption or the woodcutter's moral choice, both films suggest that in a world where truth and order have broken down, what remains of humanity depends on how one chooses to act.